Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Raben's Town Hall. Are you ready for a new 2027? My name is Larry Gonzalez, and I am the founder and managing principal of our Government Affairs Strategy Group. If this is your first time here joining us, we're particularly glad you're here. And if you've been here more than once, thank you again for your support. One of the things we value at Raven is creating space for thoughtful conversations about the issues shaping our communities, our institutions, and the work of organizations driving change. Every day, we help clients navigate complexity and change, so convening conversations like this is a natural extension of the work we do. At the heart of today's conversation is a simple but important question. How do organizations prepare for what's next before the future comes into focus? As we look ahead to January 2027, we know a new Congress is going to bring new members, new committee leadership, new priorities, and new opportunities to engage. And of course, none of us knows exactly what November will bring, and organizations can't really afford to wait until the election is over before they start planning. The decisions organizations make today about their advocacy strategies, partnerships, communications, and policy priorities will shape how effectively they can navigate whatever comes next. And that's what today's conversation is about, helping organizations think strategically about the opportunities, challenges, challenges and decisions that will define the years ahead. Raven, one of the first questions we always ask our clients is, what does success look like? Because strategy begins with being clear about what you're trying to accomplish, regardless of how the landscape evolves. So today I'm really thrilled to be joined by three incredible leaders whose work sits at the intersection of policy, advocacy, communications, and public engagement. First, we have Nikitra Bailey. Nikitra serves as the Executive Vice President of the National Fair Housing Alliance, NFHA. She leads the organization's public policy division while providing oversight of the Communications and Marketing, Education and Outreach and Resource Development Division. She's provided expert testimony to Congress on a range of fair and affordable housing issues and reform of the government-sponsored enterprises toward their chartered mission obligations. Thank you so much for being here with us, Nikitra. Next, we have Dr. Eileen Cardona Arroyo. Eileen is a partner at Hart Research. She specializes in strategic messaging on policy issues and persuasive political communication to engage the American public and mobilize and expand the electorate. She's a recognized expert on Latino political behavior, and she's been invited to offer political commentary on MSNBC, NBC, ABC, and a very long list of other. She's a talking head, in other words. She led research for the DCCC's Latino Constituency Program in 2024 and is also part of the NBC News polling team, where she has led research on Latino voters for Telemundo. Welcome, Eileen. And finally, we have John Yang. John is president and executive director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, where he leads the organization's work to advance civil and human rights through policy advocacy, litigation, education, and community empowerment. A recognized leader in civil rights and public policy, he's testified before Congress and regularly appears in national media on issues impacting the Asian American community. Prior to joining AAJC, he served in the Obama administration, was the Asia Pacific legal director of a Fortune 200 company, and practiced as a partner at a Washington, D.C. based law firm. Thanks for being here, John. So just to get us started here for today's discussion, I want to start with a broader question, and I want both Nikitra and you, John, to kind of think about it, because I do want to start with Eileen for her perspective. But sort of this broader question is, when you think about the next Congress, what's one thing you believe organizations should already be preparing for today that perhaps they aren't thinking enough about? So I'll leave that question for you to mull over, but I want to start with Eileen. Eileen, your work focuses on understanding public opinion, political behavior, and the issues shaping how people engage with institutions. So, how should organizations think about the relationship between public opinion, politics, and policymaking over the next several years?
Well, thank you, Larry, for that question. And thank you for inviting me and excited to have this conversation. I am sure that we'll hear very thoughtful, policy-oriented answers in just a second. I think I'll approach this from my lens as a pollster and the perspective on public opinion and why that matters. And what I think is what I'll call the elevator pitch that I think every organization should be working on right now. Looking ahead to 2027, obviously we don't know what's going to happen after the November elections exactly. But I think based on what I'm seeing in polling and research, what every organization must have a clear and bold answer to is to meet people where they are right now is how are the changes that you are advocating for disrupting the status quo, and how do they serve everyday Americans as opposed to the wealthy and powerful, and sort of having a well-defined answer. That elevator pitch is going to be important and essential to engaging the public at this time. One of the things that I keep seeing in research is that people or voters are hungry for bold ideas, and that means that and disruption, and that means that diverse segments of the electorate can actually gravitate towards ideas that span the ideological spectrum, but if it's packaged in the right way, right? So when we see 2024 Trump voters say, "I like Mondani," we shouldn't assume that these voters have shifted their ideological views in a span of 2 years, but rather it does say something about what they think of government, which is they're very skeptical, and also what they want from the people in government, which is disruption. So no matter which issue or policy change an organization is advocating for, it is really essential to insert themselves right where voters are, and it is in disruption and in change, and making things work for everyday Americans as opposed to the powerful and the ultra rich.
Right, right. No, very helpful context. I appreciate that. So let me come back to Nikitra and John. Again, if you had time to think about it, what's one thing you believe organizations already be preparing for today that perhaps they aren't thinking enough about? So let me start with Nikitra.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here with you all. So let me contextualize my answer and who we are as an organization. So we are the voice of the fair housing movement. We actually represent over 170 local fair housing enforcement agencies nationwide. So what I would start with is that all politics are local, right? Like what they care about is what's happening in their local communities and what it is that they're hearing from their constituents. So if you have an opportunity to really try to set the narrative locally and drive it to Washington, D.C. At this moment, we're dealing with an affordability crisis, particularly in the housing sector, where we know that across the board, no matter where you live in these United States, housing is unaffordable and it's not fair. So we have this fair and affordable housing crisis. So it's really important to really focus in on your narrative setting and your messaging. We have spent some resources on polling, and we know that 90% of the people of America don't believe that your zip code should determine your destiny. So when we go in to meet with our members of Congress, we're going in with that local story from our local agency on the front ground, and then also connecting it to the broader narrative and messaging point, which is people want fair access to opportunity. They want to share in the nation's prosperity, and they expect Congress is the voice of the people. I mean, this is the branch of government, right? Like we, the people, right? It's the most representative form of our government. It's where their voices should matter. So go in with clear stories about local impact for how the policies you're driving really will create the change that your organization is building.
Very helpful. Thank you, Nikitra. John, where's your head at these days in terms of leading your organization forward?
Sure, and thank you for that question. It's wonderful to be here. Just by way of background for us, we're an Asian American civil rights organization. We work more at the national level with respect to policies, litigation, and really trying to empower our communities. I'm actually going to be a little bit of I don't know if I would call it a contrarian, but I think what we should be thinking about is not as 2027 as this watershed moment, but actually for that to think about how all of us as organizations are setting up for 2028. Right, because like that, as a practical matter, sort of that's where the next fight is going to be at, in that next presidential cycle, right? So like even with respect to where policymakers are at, what they're going to be thinking about, in my opinion, right, regardless of who is in power, et cetera, is like how they're going to set up that next fight, how they're going to set up that next election. So in terms of the policies that we want, I don't want to say that it's small ball, but it's like actually, if anything, I want to think about this as narrative. It's like, what is the narrative that we have 2 years to set up a narrative? What in the next 2 years is the narrative that we want? What is the message that we want to make sure that our communities, so it's like American public really has as we go into that 2028 season.
Right. No, okay. Interesting perspective. Um, I'll come back to you, Eileen, just maybe for some insights around, again, it's kind of the prediction market to a certain extent. And, look, we all follow the news. We know what's going on in terms of the political headwinds and what history tells us about the midterms. What's your sense in terms of what are we in? Oh, we're almost here in August, less than 100 days, 98 days till the midterms. What are we seeing in terms of, House takeover, Senate takeover? Obviously, we know the White House is not going to change. What's your sense of that, where we're at on that?
Well, Larry, every pollster loves to be asked while being recorded what's going to happen in the next election, to have it
We'll,
played
we'll,
back
we'll
to me.
come back to we'll come back in 4 months and ask you, or 3 months.
Yes. Listen, I can say based on what we're seeing, the tides have shifted generally more to be more favorable for Democrats. It's still a tough election. There's not a lot of districts that are at play, or at least that are what people consider to be at play compared to in previous midterms. But I think we're looking likely at a divided government in post November. I mean, that would be my prediction. Let's see if that happens. And obviously, that does limit the extent to which organizations can play and how they position themselves. But I do think that increasingly in the polling I'm doing and the quantitative and qualitative research that I'm doing, that the American public, yes, of course, they exist in their traditional categories of Democrat and Republican and whatever ideology comes with that. But there is a broader segment of voters that are in this disruption category. And a lot of them, honestly, can gravitate toward ideas that don't fit into a nicely glued together cohesive ideology. And so I do think that creates opportunities for organizations to sell or make their best case to the American public, regardless of who is in power.
Sure. No, appreciate that. So one of the things I know, I hear this a lot in the work that I do on behalf of clients, but one of the things we hear is that, quote, the advocacy playbook has changed. So would love to hear, John and Akitra, your perspective, if you agree with that. And if so, what do organizations need to rethink about how they build influence, how you engage decision makers, and advance your priorities over the next several years? John, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I mean, I think it has and it hasn't. Like, certainly it has in the sense like how we reach people is different now, right? Like, because if you think about whether it's 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, how we reach people was more in a traditional way, whether it is through earned media, whether it is through sort of direct access to policymakers and sort of influence at that level. Now, sort of at least for us, we feel like there is kind of a reverse piece to it, which is trying to reach people directly from where they're at within their communities, with respect to whether it's social media, whether it is through small group conversations, like working with smaller community groups. Like, the good thing about technology is that it allows us to do that in a way that, frankly, I think it was very difficult to do in the past. Doing these types of Zoom calls with small groups throughout the country, like you think about the so-called kitchen table conversations. We, as a large or a national organization, actually can have those kitchen table conversations in a way we frankly couldn't really, 10 years ago, because we couldn't really do these types of Zoom sessions, right? So, like, I think in that sense, it has changed, and like we do need to think about how to embrace that. I think the other piece, certainly in this moment, that I continue to think about is like, how do we I'm going to call it stay in our lane, because there's so many issues that are hitting all of us. It's like, I think there's a tendency, or like certainly for nonprofit leaders, sometimes we think, oh, we have to address this or we have to address that. And at least for us, part of that is like, okay, we don't need to address it all. Making sure we know what the ecosystem is, who else are experts in different fields, right? We at AHAC really don't have an economic justice portfolio, right? I would love it if we could, but I'm not going to be able to grow one right now. So like, all right, who does economic justice? Now, in part, like, Nikitra, NFHA, like the Fair Housing Alliance, they do that. Like, so when we had issues like alien landlords or something like that, we could partner with them. knowing who the good partners are that have the expertise that we don't have, I think is critical in this moment.
No, very good points. Nikitra,
Indeed.
and has your advocacy playbook changed?
What I like to think is that we've always got to be able to see the forest and the trees at the same time, right? Like we always have to understand the context in which we're working. And one of the things that we do, again, from being locally based, is try to bring those local community voices to the conversation and try to root our strategy in what's actually happening on the ground to the people that our agencies actually serve. They serve disabled veterans, they serve families with children, they serve survivors of physical and domestic violence. So always having those stories front and center in this conversation, and then helping whomever is sitting in those chairs in terms of policymakers as to what does that mean for them in their local communities. How are these agencies helping to protect people from unlawful housing discrimination so that people can have safe, decent, and affordable housing free of discrimination in those local communities? How can we empower these local agencies with the proper resources that they need? Because oftentimes these are job creators, right? Like we don't often think about our work as employment opportunities in local communities, but maintaining the health of these agencies is essential because they actually do real work and employ real people in local communities, and they need their resources to sustain their work so that they can serve their missions, but also make sure that when those people who are experiencing discrimination have that harmful impact, there's somebody there to pick up the call, because they're not going to call Washington, D.C., right? Like we're saving the federal government money with our work. They're not going to call Washington, D.C. They're going to call these local community-based leaders and hope that they can reach some type of conciliatory relief that'll help them be able to live their lives and walk in their American dreams how they envision them. And I think to John's point, always thinking about who the coalition partner is. The beauty of being a part of the civil rights movement is that we work together, right? We're a large coalition. We represent all of America, not just some of America. I know some people don't fully understand that. So we don't have to sing a new song based on who's sitting in the seat, because everything that we do is going to lift the boat for everyone. It's not a zero-sum game, and it's helping those policymakers really appreciate that the reforms and the changes that we're promoting and pushing for the communities that we represent are really strong economic drivers for the economy overall. So one of the things that I often say is that discrimination distorts the marketplace, right? Like it causes our markets to underperform. So if we want to have healthy markets, we don't want discrimination in housing to deter people from their opportunities.
Very good points. What I hear when people say the advocacy playbook has changed, and I know that normally my view is always congressional centric, so to speak, but so much of the advocacy work seems to have shifted away from Congress, meaning the House and the Senate, although obviously those are still very important to have those meetings and educate, members and staff, and towards the White House and federal agencies, right? So I think that's when folks talk about the advocacy playbook, it feels like, unless you have access to the White House, you're going to have a difficult time moving stuff ahead. But let me shift, because a question came to my mind for you, Eileen, in terms of, the issues that matter most to Americans right now. It's always the economy, right? But the work that Nikitra does and John, those are extremely important issues, whether it's housing or, access to jobs, of course, civil rights generally, but it's still pretty much the economy, right? And these housing related issues. I mean, a bill passed, right? And we can talk a little bit more about, what that bill will do, but just wanted to get your perspective on that, Eileen, in terms of, what are the issues that still really matter most, or what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely, anyone who's been paying attention doesn't need me to say that obviously people are focused on cost and prices, and that is the top priority in every poll in every part of the country, no matter how you break up voters. Definitely, it's housing, it's healthcare, it's the cost of groceries, it's childcare, it's everything. I think one of the things oftentimes my clients ask me, well, tell me what is it specifically about cost that people care about. And the answer is that they're encountering struggles with cost at every point in their lives, from paying their rent to going to the grocery store to finding affordable childcare. So it's not one thing, it's all together and all altogether really compounding to a really big problem in their lives, and how they not only meet their immediate needs but also plan for the future. I will say that for organizations, some organizations will have a like housing. Obviously, it's a very easy to make a cost case for housing advocacy, but the struggle that other organizations find, and that I get asked a lot, is what do we do when my issue doesn't neatly align within a cost framework, or at least not explicitly, like climate change or abortion or other issues. Not that they're not cost related, but they're maybe not the way that people think about costs right now. And I would say, if you can make a credible cost argument, make it, but don't force it. Because I do think that sometimes when organizations try to make what they're doing about cost in a way that is not organic to voters, it really doesn't work. And so, finding the right lane for the issue is important, even though, of course, people care about cost, but it doesn't work for every issue out there in the way that people think about it.
No, for sure. Let me come back real quickly because Nikitra, I want to spend just a couple minutes on this housing bill, and it's been called, the most significant achievement in the last several decades. I want to get your sense of that, and then I want to go to John on a very specific, also, kind of where we're at on voting rights and access for folks, and the impact it may have on the upcoming elections. But want to get your sense of the recently passed housing bill, Nikitra.
Absolutely. So we just passed the Road to Housing Act, which is the first time in almost over 30 years that we've seen federal legislation to address the nation's fair and affordable housing crisis. And then you all will hear me keep saying fair and affordable housing crisis, so I'm messaging as I'm speaking to you all, because everyone's talking about affordability. And it's really important in this moment that we also focus in on fairness. Every time this nation tries to solve for affordability without solving for fairness, we actually fail. And that's why we're really excited about our achievements in this bill, because we were able to get the Appraisal Modernization Act's reconsideration of value for a homeowner who may have had their home appraised and the valuation came in lower than they expected. So they have a right to have that value reconsidered. And for communities to have a history of underservice, this is a major, major accomplishment, because often homes in Black and Latino communities are undervalued by trillions of dollars, meaning that those families don't have the opportunity to benefit from homeownership and build that long-term wealth that can be passed forward intergenerationally in those communities. So for us, we were really excited to see that provision. We were also really excited to see something that we have been calling for, which is support for small dollar mortgages, because it's important to contextualize the nation's housing crisis. There is not what we like to call a challenge with securing housing in every community across the United States in terms of affordability. There are actually some communities where you can still buy a house for less than $100,000. And unfortunately, a lot of lenders have not wanted to make those loans because they associate that they're going to have high costs for a low return. So we were really excited to see this bill put in this requirement for the Federal Housing Administration to do a pilot for loans at 100K or less. This is going to be really important in communities throughout the nation, states that are really key to this upcoming election: Alabama, Ohio, Pennsylvania, places in Arizona, where you can still afford a home for less than 100K. So those are two of the things in the bill that we're really excited about. But we also sent a message immediately in analyzing the bill about what 2.0 needs to look like, right? Like, part of our strategy with this entire process is that we've asked for a comprehensive strategy. And in this Congress, it seemed that we could only get the supply side remedies, which the bill is mostly comprised of. But what we did was we said, okay, those are important, and we need these demand side strategies. So now we're at a place where all of the supporters are really saying this is an initial good start and we need to do more. So we were very strategic in how we approach this legislation to not come out and say, this is the solution, this is it. It was, okay, we're seeing a bipartisan Congress work together, which is huge in these moments, right? Like, that's a huge accomplishment in of itself. But let's not stop there, because the voters have asked for a comprehensive solution, and we need those demand side strategies like first generation down payment assistance, because while while the bill actually has provisions that limit the ability of institutional investors to purchase homes in communities, we know that in places like Pittsburgh, a $25,000 first generation down payment assistance is going to help someone actually qualify for their home and be able to move in their home and keep their housing stock in a local community member's hand. Again, something that, we think that the members of Congress are concerned about.
Interesting. Great work. So, John, this conversation will seem moot in the event that, communities can't participate in the electoral process. And certainly, there are a lot of things happening. I know your organization is right in the middle of it, so would just kind of love to hear your perspective. I know there was an initial ruling by a DC District Court around mail-in balloting just a few hours ago, but would love to hear kind of your focus and hopefully a sense of optimism that people will still be able to participate. But love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, and at least for now, I would have that sense of optimism. Certainly, the courts have done their jobs. Like organizations like mine have been filing lawsuits to ensure that mail-in balloting is still the norm. And let's be clear, why that's important for the Asian American community. About 40% of our community does not vote on the day of elections, that Tuesday. Rather, we do rely on mail-in balloting or, in some cases, in-person early voting. And
Right.
there's different reasons we could talk about that but that's important. Second component, obviously, is people talk about the proof of citizenship piece, right? And let's make that real too. For the Asian American community, one thing is that 65% of our community are immigrants. Literally, we don't have a U.S. birth certificate, right? But just as importantly, you think about everyone that is a married female, right? You will have maybe a birth certificate from the U.S. that says Jane Smith. But if you married, now you have to link that to what? A marriage certificate that says that you became Jane Scott, right? Like maybe you do have a passport that already has that, but like the complexity behind that is I think one of the things that concerns us greatly about these attempts to restrict voting. I think the other thing I would want to make sure that people understand about this is not a partisan issue. Like sometimes, and frankly, the news I think contributes to this, is they make this into a partisan issue. It's like Democrats were victorious in this, Republicans want that. No, for us, it's about making sure, like we're in a democracy. I think it should be fundamental that the more people that vote, the better. And again, so it's an easy cost-benefit analysis. The cost of denying people the right to vote is significant. The so-called benefit of preventing fraudulent voting, all of the reputable studies that are out there show that that is minuscule. That has never changed in an election. So what is the real benefit that's happening? So like, I think the clear message I want to make sure people understand is this is not partisan. This really is about just making sure that we have that functioning democracy where we want people to vote. And number two is like what the real world consequences of some of these things that are being talked about are.
And
What interesting.
Can I jump in one second?
Yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
So, because I think John is talking about a lot of, structural barriers that could exist to voting that the courts are handling. But I would say there's another area of voter suppression, which comes in the form of voter intimidation. And, there's a lot of time between now and November. And what I've seen working with, Latino voters and public opinion, that when we do see spikes of ICE actions and detentions, it does at this time create, the unfortunately effect of voter intimidation. And it's not just that people who are citizens, they can vote. And it's not that maybe they fear about getting deported if they go vote, but no one wants to be attacked and no one wants to have a bad experience. And that, I think, is something that we should also be paying attention to, not just the structural, of course, we should be continue to keep battling that. But as we speak about the things that are happening, I worry about how much we're reinforcing to people that they should be concerned, that they might be having a bad experience when they go out to vote. And I think we have to be mindful of how do we fight back against these efforts without unintentionally making people feel like, maybe you shouldn't go because, it might not work out well for you.
Right.
And if I may jump in just a little bit to talk about our HBCU students, I think it's to John's point. So much of our work is just across our ecosystems, right? Like a lot of the provisions will also hurt students at historically Black colleges and universities and places where, they could usually go in and they would have an early voting site on their campuses. Those things have been removed. So to Eileen's point, what we're trying to do is mobilize as many people in coalition for those organizations that are doing voter mobilization work to really support that mobilization upfront and early, and to try to get as many people as possible engaged in this election. This is going to be a very critical election. All of our priorities are really on the table, and the future of our nation is on the table. And we use this as an opportunity from where we sit to talk about how housing is so fundamental to voting. We know that people who are safely housed are regular voters. So we really show how these issues are interconnected and why it's important for all of our communities to be mobilized and to get out early, and to cast their ballots in every way that they can so that their voices can be heard. We really want people to appreciate that this is our nation, right? Like the we the people is really important, right? And all always means all. So just reminding people that the power, particularly with our Congress, lies in our hands. And the more that we engage, the better the outcomes will be for our communities. And when we can do it with a shared vision about what prosperity and opportunity looks like for all of us, we do better as a nation. We don't leave any community behind.
Appreciate that. So let me bring it back to sort of the original premise of, are you prepared for a 2027? Because I know we have a lot of folks listening in, kind of just starting to think about things, or maybe they're a little bit ahead of the game thinking about, where we go. So there's a number of things we can say for sure right now. I know for my part, one of the things I'm helping clients with is already map out. I mean, you all know this, the redistricting. There are not a lot of congressional districts in play if we really look at things, right? And so there are some things we can say definitively right now on really both sides, the Democratic side and the Republican side. If you want a primary and you're sitting in one of those districts where it's, let's say, R+10 or D+10, more than likely you're going to be in Congress come January 2027. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on kind of advising folks, or maybe you've already started to do this with your organizations. It certainly feels like once you've come to that realization and mapped it out, you know, engagement's really important, right? You can start that education and engagement now. So let's maybe Nikitra, if you want to take that first, and then I'll turn to John.
Sure. One of the benefits of working in the fair housing field is that fair housing is bipartisan, right? Like it's always had strong bipartisan support. And so recently, now we're under attack, and we've had to file at least 3 lawsuits to keep our local community agencies in their funding in a consistent way. So one of the benefits about being bipartisan and just kind of thinking about how we're talking across the aisle at all times as a nonpartisan agency is that we step back when we're going to have major elections and we do scenario planning, right? Like we plan for what might likely be the outcome if A is the outcome. What might likely be the outcome is B is the outcome. And we are board driven, right? So our board is actively engaged in helping us think that through. We bring in external experts. We kind of come up with a strategy and a plan for what we're going to do depending on whatever scenario comes, so that after the election, we're ready to go. Because if you wait until the election, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. So that's one of the things that I would strongly encourage organizations to do, is to really invest in some real kind of strategic scenario planning about what the outcomes could be and what they actually mean for your communities that you're advocating on behalf of, and come up with a strategy to go in either direction based on what the results ultimately.
For sure. Good stuff. John?
Yeah, at least for us, I think, look, I mean, I think Eileen has it right that the expectation is probably that Democrats might take the House. And so part of it for us is thinking about, like, all right, if that's the case, given the issues that we have, they are typically considered more progressive issues or Democrat-leaning issues, right? They're not political issues, but they're just where our values are. Then it's sort of thinking about who the leaders are going to be, make sure they're educated about what our issues are, and setting an agenda. Again, I recognize that like that agenda is kind of going to be a placeholder agenda. We can't be super aggressive about it. but let's set an agenda. And frankly, there's a lot of education. I mean, there's just one of the things we've discovered in these last few years is that there's just so much misinformation or disinformation what diversity, equity, and inclusion actually is, right? Sort of the work that we do actually entails. For us in the Asian American community, there's a lot of misinformation or a lot of scapegoating around China, right? Now, again, when I say that, let's be clear. The Chinese government is bad. Xi Jinping is a dictator. I will readily agree with that. But we need to have smart policies when it comes to international students, when it comes to professors, when it comes to scientists that want to come over that will help the economy. To Eileen's point, like that's how I make the economic argument around immigration or around some of these policies. It's like, how do we make sure our economy is growing? Well, discrimination doesn't help all of that, right? So like for us, the preparation is around that. I think the other piece for nonprofits, depending on where your funding source is, I'm going to be very, very direct about this, is like corporations in the last couple of years had cut back quite a bit on funding for so-called progressive organizations or organizations that do civil rights or sort of race-based work, or whatever you want to call it, right? And again, I'm speaking candidly. What we are hearing is that like they are rethinking that right now. If there is going to be a change in Congress, they want to stay ahead of the curve so that sort of they don't get called out for sort of being too backwards on all of that. So if that's the case, like for nonprofits that do get different types of funding, they might want to think about what that looks like and prepare themselves for it.
Interesting.
And if I could just say to
Sure.
John's point, like I think we've got to do a better job of not having like 80 things, right? Like what are our top 5 priorities, right? Like we're all coming in with these priorities. So how do we walk into these spaces with 5 things that we want with core deliverables broken down in the time frame for which the body is in play?
And look, the reality is you both work on issues again, that shouldn't be partisan, whether it's access to the ballot box, right? Or, everybody needs a home, and needs a, warm, whether it's renting or buying or whatever it is. And ultimately, these issues, unfortunately, do become overly partisan. And so, yeah, I would love to hear. I know we're going to take some questions here in a couple minutes, but I just wanted to ask because I know what this piece is so essential to the work that you do, and that is around coalitions, right? It's so important for you all to have these relationships throughout the country. And so I want to hear maybe a little bit, if you could, on kind of what makes an effective coalition today, and how should organizations be thinking differently about building partnerships moving forward? Nikitra or
What
John?
One of the things that we like to think about in our space, and we've been privileged enough to always do this, is to partner with industry, right? Like part of the battle is that people don't appreciate that civil rights is not a zero-sum thing. So we spent a lot of time on this call talking about how when we improve outcomes for some communities, we improve them for all. I always tell people, for Black consumers overall, if we just address discrimination targeted at Black people, we would grow our economy by $5 trillion. That's not counting our Asian American folks in the country. That's not counting our Latino folks. That's not counting women. If we address discrimination, we're gonna lift the floor for everyone. So one of the things that we try to do is to really help industry understand how their profitability will be impacted if people have fair opportunity. So we've been able to build really trusting relationships with the sectors to help them understand why these consumers are important. We also are in a position where we will sue you if you harm consumers. So it is in your economic interest upfront to avoid that litigation. So that has also driven some of our partnerships. And that's something that we really just try to get to as a last resort, but it is a constant reality. And we remind them that complying with the law is important because, to the point, it is less expensive to make a fair home opportunity available to someone than it is to actually discriminate against them and have to come in on the back end and fix it up. So we try to bring to the civil rights space some of those industry connections and partnerships, because we're always working as part of a broad coalition on civil rights issues. And then we think about how can we bring in whom it is others might consider to be unconventional partners to this space. We work really closely with the National Association of Realtors, for instance, around fair housing. They really are doing a lot of work around fair housing. So they have one of the largest, lobbying groups in the nation. When they come to Washington, D.C., they wield a lot of power. So where we have alignment, we try to make sure we are advocating on those issues and those priorities together.
John?
At least from my perspective, look, I mean, I think there's an old adage that coalitions move at the speed of trust. And I think that's absolutely true. That hasn't changed. On the other hand, there are some things that you can do probably to expedite that speed. And again, and I would say that technology is an enhancer here. Like before, like to develop that trust, you need to have these convenings where you all got together, right? So you can meet face to face. That's absolutely important, right? But like again, with Zoom, Microsoft Teams, etc., you could meet. It's still not ideal. It's still better to actually be in person, but actually being able to do these types of meetings on Zoom helps. The fact that you text each other, like the number of sort of coalition leaders that I text on a constant basis, right? That's another way to build up trust somewhat quickly because you're just kind of giving in real time what each of us are feeling. So I think those are components to building those coalitions. The other big thing for me is think about where our friction points are going to be. Look, the Asian American community, again, we've oftentimes been used as a wedge. You think about affirmative action, you even think about immigration debates, right? And it's like knowing that, we try to be intentional about reaching out to communities that may distrust us, right? For legitimate reasons. And we always want to be real about it. Look, there's anti-Blackness in the Asian community. I want to name that and say, look, we do need to have real conversations about this so that we could dispel some of that tension so that we can move forward together.
Certainly, certainly. Eileen, in your work, I know Hart Research is a bipartisan firm. So you get inquiries.
We're a Democratic polling firm.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you also did Republican polling. Still would be interested to hear from your perspective. I'm hanging on what John talked about, the diversity, equity, inclusion. Not that it's faded. I mean, certainly there are still attacks, around those words, but what are you seeing around sort of that effort? Who are the groups that are being impacted? And I guess I'm asking it from the perspective of certainly the African American vote is going to be very important coming up in these elections, the Asian American, the Latino vote. Are there folks still interested in kind of understanding what is the pulse of thought in these communities?
Yeah, the whole conversation about DEI is what I, for lack of a better word, will call a scam, because it is an example of how partisan conversations happening in government among a few elite kind of misrepresented where the public is on these things. Because in every single polling that I've done on issues of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, the public is with us or with DEI on the values and the outcomes. I mean, it is not as unpopular as some people will have us believe that it is. I think where there is a lot of friction and where there is a need to tell a better story about what DEI does and why it matters is in the implementation. And in full fairness, the implementation of DEI, even among people who have benefited from DEI, is often seen as not perfect, right? That it ends up, perhaps some people feel tokenized, or where the implementation leads them to take on bigger burdens and in the workplace, etc. But the values behind DEI, the goals behind DEI, all those things remain incredibly popular across wide segments of the American public. And really, it is a scam that we've been led to believe that it is as toxic as some people will have us believe that it is. And it really isn't. Even for corporations or nonprofits, who I think, John, you mentioned that they were quick to kind of roll back their programs on DEI. Well, when we've done research on consumers, it doesn't really matter to them. So it was steps being taken in response to how DEI was represented, rather than matching where the public is on many of these issues.
And if I may, it's about reminding people that it's ultimately within our Constitution, right? Like, we are a nation where our Constitution and our Declaration are of independence is just really important, right? So these policies are fundamentally about fairness and fair opportunity, right? And Raven, I'm going to give you all a plug. You all did tremendous work at the start of this debate and helped us formulate powerful talking points. And many of us have stayed on those, reminding people actually what diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility absolutely are and what they are not, right? And then reminding them that it's not a zero-sum game. And if you take away these fair opportunities, it might seem like you're only hurting some communities, but look at what's happening right now. The elites are really benefiting the most from our economy in this moment. Many people, that's why this fear can be exploited today. Many people are just afraid that they're going to be left behind. So if you take away opportunities that simply give people a fair chance at education, a fair chance at employment, a fair chance to buy a home in the community of their choice, you are ultimately going to hurt yourself. And the people who are going to benefit already are overwhelmingly benefiting from our nation's policies. And that's something that for me personally, so I'm going to take my NAPA hat off for a quick moment here. We have to help people understand that our policies have created economic opportunity in our country, right? Not this idea that we bootstrap our way forward. There is not a person here who has bootstrapped their way forward. This land didn't belong to any of us. Most of the Europeans who came here with land grants to start in this nation. And many of the people who got those land grants can trace their family's wealth to those land grants. So this idea that, people have bootstrapped themselves in this American story to create this independent wealth. No, the wealth always was driven from our policies. And in fact, time and time again throughout our nation's history, we intentionally excluded communities. And we know that that has cost all of us. We have an underperforming economy because of that. So if we want to have a healthy economy, if we want to give people an opportunity to fairly succeed, we can't just exclude people while the wealthiest of Americans continue to benefit from the nation's policies.
Here, here. Thank you. I appreciate that. And just in reference to to the work on DEI, a huge shout out to Dr. Cardona Arroyo and her heart research on doing that wonderful work. It's been very helpful to a lot of folks that we've shared that with. So we really appreciate that. So I know we've covered a lot of ground today, and I want to open it up for folks, for our viewers, and feel free to ask your questions for our panelists using the Q&A function. I guess, let's see, until some questions pop up. So,
There is a question that popped up, although it's more of a political nature, so I would probably ask Dr. Cardona Arroyo to answer it.
oh, I'm looking
It's in
here.
our Q&A section. I don't know if y'all can see it.
Let me see.
Yeah, it's how do you see the friction within the DNC between Democratic
Here it is.
Socialists and those leaning more centrist playing out towards
Yep.
2028?
Yep.
Um, I think it depends on where you are in the country, and how that plays out. I will say that it's not initially what we're seeing. It's not always as toxic in every situation as people might assume that it is. And especially again, maybe I'll speak to with the example I gave earlier about those Trump Mondani voters or people who voted for Trump and like Mondani. There's a way where I've done qualitative conversations with voters who voted for Trump in 2024, and now they kind of like Mondani and have said, well, if that's what Democratic Socialists are, I like them too. Again, that's not going to be the case for every Trump voter, or not. I'm not saying that we should kind of appeal to that in every part of the country, but it will vary from district to district, area to area. And for some voters that are looking for disruption, it's less about the ideology and more about like who's going to create these changes that are going to get us to a better place.
Hmm.
I mean, look, the reality with that is he has certainly followed up on many of his promises, and I think that's what people are looking for. If it's just talk, whether it's groceries free, city-run grocery stores, or free buses, or free childcare, if any politician, policymaker is following up on their promises, then it's a good thing. So let's see here. While we're waiting I don't see any additional questions. Do you all?
I think one of the things that we should really encourage is and this is something that I think we're all just trying to hone in this moment. How do we make it plain, right? Like, how do we make it clear to communities what it is we are doing in a way that really meets communities where they are? I think what we see in this conversation right now around affordability is people really are self-motivated. Like, what do these policies absolutely mean for me and my family? You know, will my children have an opportunity to have a better future? That's the promise of the American dream. So we've been really trying to use our polling and messaging research to truly hone in on connecting people and helping them understand how fair housing, you know, in our world, where you live absolutely matters, and it impacts every element of your life. It's so critical to education, to transportation, to healthcare. We often say, our president and CEO, that if you can tell me your zip code, we can predict how long you'll live, because it literally is correlated in that way. So how do we talk to people about our policies and solutions in a way that resonates with them, so that when they are engaging with policymakers, they can see themselves in the solutions that we're building?
Mhm.
Absolutely. So it looks like we have another question here. How are you thinking about or planning to engage with the public directly where they live over the next year or two? And secondarily, encouraging that education to turn into nonpartisan activism. So, John?
Sure. I mean, in the first question, I think for us, so we have what's called the Community Partners Program. So we work with community groups throughout the country. You know, I think it's about 38 states, 350 different groups. Like, we work through them to sort of really talk to people throughout the country, specifically, obviously, in the Asian American community, about what their concerns are, what potential fixes look like, et cetera, and really try to empower them to do that for themselves. What that looks like, often I've said, is like, it's trying to encourage them and giving them the tools to run for the local PTA or run for city council. You know, even like in this election season, I'm trying to encourage people to become it's sort of election officials, right? To just work at the polls. I mean, having you engaged in that civic process in all of these different ways, among other things, makes you feel better about the fact that, look, our democracy is flawed, but it's still functioning in different ways. And by doing that, you also see how you can improve. By doing that, you come into contact with people that might disagree with you on some political issues, but you also find some commonalities. I think a theme that we've been hearing here is there's so much more in common that all of us actually have, but like sometimes the media makes it sound like we're so polarized. And so I actually encourage people also just to get out a little bit outside of that media bubble, so that we see it's like, okay, we actually, the change is doable, but it is going to require all of us to do our own little part.
Yeah, we've been encouraging our members to go in to those local offices, right? Like, I think one of the things that happened during the crisis is that we have been able to use technology to engage with electeds. And I think at this moment it's so important to get before them, to talk about your issues directly with their staff in those local communities. We drive a lot of calls to Washington, D.C., and where, you know, 170 members are throughout the United States. We really encourage them to get as many local meetings with their members of Congress, but also with their mayors, right, and their city council leaders, and with their county commissioners, because it's important for all of those people in those elected positions to understand the work that they're doing in their local community, how they're helping people to remain safely housed, free of discrimination, and how in many ways they are driving economic engines in their communities by being employers. That's a critical part about the work that is happening in the nonprofit sector that we don't talk enough about. So if, for instance, we're in a situation where HUD is challenging grants to these local community organizations and trying to create a new competitive process that will pretty much take them out of their capacity to get the federal funding under the Fair Housing Initiatives program that's designed for their work, what does that mean for job losses, right? Like, how many people in their communities are going to actually lose jobs if their agencies close? And there's no better voice than a local mayor or city council person calling Congress saying, you're costing us jobs here. You know, we need to make sure that HUD doesn't get rid of this critical program that, one, is self-serving the people in our communities, but also helping us to maintain jobs in this very challenging economic environment.
And can because I do think that this local engagement is so important because we've been talking about the importance of people turning out to vote and participating in our elections, but the foundation of that is civic engagement, and that's where really this country is lacking and kind of going backwards. People not participating in their local communities in the way that perhaps they did in the past. I've in research that I've kind of done with people who are outside of those civic engagement spaces, a big hurdle barrier is that a lot of people say, well, I'm not the type of person that really engages. I'm not the type of person that really does things like that. But then when you ask them, do you help your neighbor when they have a problem? Do you, go to your kid's school and talk to their teachers? That is engage. I think it's something about mirroring back what people do already in their everyday lives. You are the type of person that can engage. And if you're already doing this, you can also do this other thing. And I can't like strengthening that sense of agency and in the community and building up civic engagement is probably the most fundamental thing we can do in this country, and it will trickle down to other things like turnout in elections, but it really is the foundation of what we are I think are lacking right now.
Absolutely. So there's certainly a lot of food for thought, and I appreciate you all offering that. It's never easy to kind of put a nice little ribbon on a conversation like this. It certainly lends itself to further conversation. So, but just again, reflecting on our conversation here as we're getting ready to close out, if you had one message that you hope organizations who are here today that they leave with as they prepare for 2027, what do you think that would be?
Well, I mean, I'll start. I my first reaction is don't limit the possibility of what can be based on the current reality right now. One of the things that humbles me as a pollster is how quickly things change in ways that are unpredictable and unimaginable. And just because something feels impossible to achieve right now, it doesn't mean that it can't be achievable in the future. And I think broadening your scope of what is possible, being pragmatic, understanding the reality, but not limiting our idea of what could be, I think is important for any organization.
Appreciate that. John?
Yeah, I would echo that because a lot of, well, not a lot, but people ask me every now and then, it's like, how do you have hope in this time, right? This is all so depressing. The work that you're doing can be so depressing. I mean, on one hand, maybe that's true, but like I think about the 1940s, 1950s, the civil rights movement during that time. Like I purposely say 40s and 50s because that's when it really felt hopeless. It wasn't until you started hitting the early 60s, all of a sudden you've seen change. But that change took decades. Now, on one hand, you could say, oh gosh, it's going to take decades. Why even bother? I actually take the reverse view and kind of say, well, that's why we do it. If we could just move our little bit of increment during every moment that we have, we could be proud of that little moment. We don't need to be the one that, yeah, it'd be great to have that one big victory. But I think if we could celebrate some of the small victories, I mean, like birthright citizenship being the latest example. On one hand, yeah, it's like the fact that we have to celebrate it, I will admit, feels kind of weird because like it seems so obvious. On the other hand, let's celebrate it at least, right? Let's say, all right, well, we did our job on our watch to at least make sure that piece stayed okay, right? And I think that will also help us get through this time.
That's right. Nikitra,
I would
final
just
thought?
ditto what they said, right? Like faith without works is dead, right? Like you have to really mobilize and have big thoughts and big dreams. And, it's going to take us doing things, one little pebble at a time, but we can ultimately move the mountains. I mean, that's the story of all of us, right? Like look at this panel today, right? Like look at the shoulders that we sit on and that we stand on, right? Like we're someone else's dream. And it's been realized because of their consistent behavior and commitment to our nation's democracy. And at the end of the day, all means all. So don't, count yourself out of, this democracy. It literally is a three-letter word, all. So that means all of us.
Thank you all for being a part of today's discussion. Really appreciate you, John Yang, Nikitra Bailey, Dr. Eileen Cardona Arroyo. For those of you out there, on behalf of everyone at Raben, we really appreciate you spending part of your afternoon, or for those on the West Coast, morning with us. and we look forward to having you join us for our next town hall. Just quickly, if you want to get in touch with Raben, you can email us at info@raben.co, or you can go to our website at raben.co, and we're on all the social medias, as they say, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And just know that today's recording will be shared via email and also uploaded to Raben's YouTube channel. So y'all can watch yourselves over and over and over and over again if you'd like. So once again, appreciate you and appreciate everyone participating out there, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.